Ready?
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I think
Thank
we're
you.
getting started.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Kalinda Lee. I serve as head of interpretation, which basically means all things mission focused, education, exhibitions, programs at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. And this afternoon, I'm honored to be here to facilitate what promises to be an enlightening and inspiring plenary featuring two people who have used their lives to be what every community needs. And here I quote the late activist Bayard Rustin, every community needs angelic troublemakers. After I introduce our two panelists, I'll share a few remarks, and then our panelists will offer brief presentations. Afterwards, I'll raise a few questions to launch our dialogue and invite audience questions for the final 15 to 20 minutes. Will Haygood, who's joining us virtually, is the author of 9 books, his most recent being Colorization, 100 Years of Black Films in a White World. His book about White House butler Eugene Allen was made into a film, The Butler, directed by Lee Daniels and starring Forest Whitaker and Oprah Winfrey. Haygood, a Guggenheim Fellow, serves as distinguished scholar in the School of Social Media, Journalism, and Film at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. This past spring, Mr. Haygood published an important article contextualizing policing in Black communities in Columbus, Ohio, historicizing the experience's relationship to terror, and positing that it is definitive of the city's and perhaps the nation's relationship to race and equity. Shannon Isom is the president and CEO of YWCA Dayton. She is responsible for the executive and administrative leadership of YWCA Dayton, dedicated to eliminating racism and empowering women. She served as YWCA Dayton board member as well as board chair before taking the helm in 2013. Isom began her career with YWCA Columbus, hired as a program manager of a pilot program. And there she solidified her commitment to women and her passion for community health. She also worked for Wyeth Pharmaceuticals Women's Health Division, Miami Valley Hospital, Premier Health Partners, and CareSource. She is my Spelman sister, holding a BS in pre-medicine biology from Spelman College. And she earned an MBA in healthcare administration from Northeastern DeMoore McKim School of Business. Isom has extensive post-baccalaureate education also from the Ohio State University School of Medicine and Wright State University's Boonshoft School of Medicine. Recently, she accepted the challenge to work with Dayton's policing reform working groups, assuming co-leadership of the section centered on deepening officers' community engagement. These speakers will, this afternoon, give us much to consider as we consider what happens when we leave this conference. SPHR, the Social Practice for Human Rights, is a conference hosted at an academic institution that is intentionally focused on wedding theory to praxis. The critical analysis here provides context for activism, offering insights into the history of human rights struggles worldwide, philosophical considerations underpinning notions of justice and equity, and frankly, the very meaning of human existence, sociological and economic systems that create and bolster systems of inequity, repression, and even violence. This is the final plenary of the conference. Entitled Ohio Justice and the Path Ahead, this session reminds us that all politics is local and the personal is political. As we set ourselves to leave this shared space with greater knowledge and a stronger community, I believe that this plenary might also help us to feel empowered to move forward with a better understanding of the multi-layered challenges we are facing and effective strategies for addressing those concerns. I think in the last plenary session, one of the speakers said, boots on ground. These insights needn't be limited to academic reflection, but rather help to chart a course toward meaningful structural challenge and change. from workers' protests to constitutional reform to torture and genocide prevention. The researchers and writers, nonprofit administrators and artists, policymakers and teachers assembled here are activists and advocates all. We see scholars lend their research to urgent human rights struggle using traditional platforms like publication and conferencing, as well as arts, protests, digital humanities, and more. This boundary crossing is not new. The borders are artificial, and while research and formal scholarship matter, the distinctions sometimes obfuscate the reality that activists are daily developing new knowledge and strategy to create the change that they call for. We are building this plane as we fly it. The work that's been shared demonstrates deep historical thinking and critical analysis that is essential for effective organizing. Considering how peril can be met with potential for meaningful change, you have led with practices that can solve critical human rights problems, often rethinking and retooling the analysis as the realities demand. Path-breaking and discursive and analytical tools are being formed in the process. And Ohio in particular is an important case study in these efforts. As an often watched, quote, swing state with aggressive indications of shifting working class sentiments towards the right, Ohio may be a harbinger of both perils and potential responses for the entire nation. I look forward to our speakers' perspectives on Ohio, justice, and the path forward. So as indicated in your program, I'm going to first allow Mr. Haygood to speak with us. And if you can frame for us some discussion of why what is happening in Ohio, particularly around policing, is so important for us all to be keeping our eye on, whether our work is national in scope or even international. I greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, hi everyone. It's nice to be here with you all. I have a lot of friends in Dayton. Shelley, thank you for inviting me. And it's wonderful to be with two Spelman ladies, two people who have studied at that great institution. It's interesting to me that my first job in life where I was paid for was in Columbus, Ohio, at the downtown police station. When I was 14 years old, I was at Monroe Junior High School. And some friends of mine said, hey man, we can help you get a job downtown washing police cars. And so I said, really? And they said, yeah. So I hopped on the bus and went downtown with them, and I talked to a sergeant for about 10 minutes, and he took me down the basement where we, in a group of us school kids, it was an after school job, and my mother was a single parent. So if I could make money after school, then that was a nice thing. And so I had this reverence for police officers. I mean, I wasn't afraid of them. And it felt nice to see them walk toward me after I had washed their car and to tell me, nice job, young man. But then when I went off to college in the 70s and started coming home, driving around town with my friends, I started getting pulled over in police cars. I mean, by the officers in those cars for no reason, just because I was Black. And it started to really grate on me. It was a police force in my hometown that was overwhelmingly white, still is more than 85% white in a multicultural city. And so that's a big problem. I think we have mythologized, I think we have mythologized law enforcement in this country so much with these programs like Cops, and it's always in the cop who is the hero, that everything is skewed toward law enforcement, even when they do bad things. We have to face reality in this country that were it not for these videos of many Blacks being killed, these law enforcement officers would not have been charged, such as in the George Floyd case. So yes, we need cops, we need law enforcement, but law enforcement now needs to be altered and needs to be fixed. And I hope that's something that the state of Ohio looks at. Our police departments have been too militarized. When I go into some cities like, and I have, it reminds me of being in South Africa as a foreign correspondent before Nelson Mandela was released. Then you see tanks and you see heavy weaponry. And that was the wrong thing to do in South Africa, and it's the wrong thing to do in this country. So that's my opening statement.
Thank you. And so Shannon, now we're going to turn to you. We had a brief conversation right before this about the ways in which, in many ways, Ohio is an indication, if not a standard bearer, for the concerns and possibilities for this nation. I'd like for you to talk about that a little bit from your lens.
Yeah, I want to first thank the room for being conscious enough and centered enough to take a moment, and maybe moments over time, to lean into this. I want to also acknowledge that it is unfortunate that we have to spend our time leaning into this, that we have to carve out days to talk about human rights, and that we have to carve out hours to talk about people's dignity and their deserving of peace. And yet we are here. So before I move forward in any other way, what I like to do and what I did 2 years ago when I was sitting on the stage moderating is first just center our energy into the work that has to be done here. As we've heard before, and I know that as you have probably heard over the last day, it is serious work. And that these vessels that hold this trauma, these vessels that hold crisis, that our muscles and our synapses and our cells, that then generationally pass it down for those that have proclivity and are built for this. This is heavy work. And that has to be acknowledged. Secondly, what I also hope, as I will get to the question, I also hope is that none of us are here as spectators. And that if you are, I'm going to invite you in to not do that, but instead to be a solver of these real big human being problems. The problems that go with human frailty and human fragility, but are solvable because they're ours. And so we can do that. In the state of Ohio and in Dayton, and as someone who's also, I lived in Columbus, I grew up in Cleveland, I am sensitive to what I call the Ohio fatigue. I tried to get away, I could not, it pulled me back, and I'm here. But in saying that, it's also made me intimately aware of what Ohio is, and we do know what it is for those of us who lean a little left or a little bit more progressive or what we think is centered in human rights. We know that this place feels very, very right-ist, very conservative. Sometimes we'll hear it as more of a traditional stance, that Ohio is just traditional, that we're a Midwest state that has Midwest values, and we celebrate those things. And yet, in any one particular city, you can go and move from rural to urban very quickly. You can move from affluence to poverty very quickly, all in the exact same span of about a couple of miles. And depending on what city you're on, it may take 10, but either way, you can go there very quickly. And it is just the natural topography of Ohio. But as you step back, you see this juxtaposition of poverty and affluence, this class system that we all live in. And then you see very quickly this demographic of very progressive amongst strictly conservative. And then on top of that, this multi-generational way in which we're all sitting in this space because somehow it brings you back, and yet you have generations of your family that's here. And many of us, maybe even some of us in this room, are called back because family's here. And it is truly this microcosm of what we're dealing with, because see, we're not on the borders. And so we don't have this heavy laden sense of the either or, but we have the and depending on where you are and how it conflates and intersects upon itself, it could feel real that you are just in a conservative space, or it could feel very real that you're in a very liberal space, and it makes you forget the struggles of those that are battling with the both and trying to have voice. I'm going to go into a same theme. I wasn't going to touch on it, but I think it's important to touch on it and honor what Will was saying on the police. I have entrenched myself deeply within the community of Dayton through YWCA. And I have centered, I try to every part of my voice to ensure impact and to ensure that we will find a space to be human and then to provide grace to our frailty, but to speak very truthfully of what we have to do. And I've done that in many tables and have certainly believed that each part of my energy is for that. And yet still, in 2018, my daughter, who graduated from Stiver School of the Arts, so she is an artist in every sense of the word, was stopped by the police coming from Cleveland to Dayton. And she was stopped in Springfield, Ohio, just 30 minutes outside of home. And she called me because, you see, when you're Black, you have to teach your children to call you because you don't know what's going to happen. And although she's a girl, and so we also don't think this really happens to girls or to women, or that it is gender-based, by the way, it is. I know as a mother and as a Black woman that anything can happen to my daughter, not only police brutality, but sexual brutality, violence against her. And that makes this vessel scared all the time. So we teach our children, they have to call us, and she did. And she was threatened that if she called her mother, that there would be a problem, but she did, and she snuck to do it anyway and then put it by her purse so nothing would happen to her. This was just a traffic stop. I listened, and I'm not exactly sure why she was stopped, but she very quickly was let go. But you can imagine that that is part of now her experience and therefore my experience. And let's not be fooled. And it has been passed down generationally that I'm already high on adrenaline because it's been passed down generationally from my mom and my mother's mother and my mother's mother. And if any of us know biology, we know that we carry our mother's mitochondria and it's how we breathe. And then my son, this past year, earlier in this year, was stopped because he made a right-hand turn without the turn signal. And I am not upset about someone teaching him to do better. Let me be clear. But what concerned me is that as a senior in high school, at an all-white high school here up the street, that he was stopped for doing that in just 1 mile from my home. And I have chosen to live in a community and in a zip code that, if you can imagine, every single solitary factor that we know that is hurtful in Ohio is in this zip code. And I chose to live there because it is important, if I'm going to have voice, then I also have the experience and the knowledge to say what needs to be said. But I know that I'm putting my family at risk, you see, because everything happens in these zip codes that we believe need to be demarcated by class and race and gender and social economics and destabilization and less resources. And so he was stopped in his Buick LaCrosse. Why is that important? Because a lawyer asked me, was he in a car that had rims or something to that effect? Full of braces, soccer sticker, and he was told to get out of the car. He was patted down. His body, and I talk about how women's bodies are sacred, and his body has already been violated at 17. He knows what that feels like for no reason. And he was asked to step over, give his ID, all the things. And then they asked to search his car after they've already searched his person. He was scared to call me. He was scared to reach to his pocket. And they asked him 3 times if he had grenades, if he had guns, if he had drugs. 3 times. And then after the 3rd time, when he would not answer, they asked him, do you not know how to speak? You can imagine when they found out it was my son. But that shouldn't matter. And so, to answer, we are a microcosm of the very thing that goes on in this country. If you don't know, if you are a spectator here, I'm going to ask you to lean in. That we have problems to solve. Lots of problems to solve, and singular vessels will, Shannon, Black women, brown women, Black bodies cannot be the only one that are the carriers of it. I'll talk more about that later.
Thank you. So I hear you both as human beings. I hear you, Shannon, as a mother of Black children. I hear you as public scholars. And I want to ask you a question about that role as public scholars. We often, as you said, Shannon, we talk about our spaces. We talk about this space in particular, right, as one that is built on traditional values. And yet we know that this is a nation largely built on genocide and enslavement and capitalism. Those are our traditional values. So how do you speak to this in audiences that are often filled with folks who don't share your sensibilities as you author in the mainstream, as it were, and thinking about things like sharing stories in film, as you speak to public audiences in your role at the YWCA, as many of us probably in this room are thinking about the ways that we engage with, capital P public audiences in ways that will resonate and be transformative.
Shall I go, Will, or would you like
We're
to?
supposed to answer first.
Yes.
Yes, I'm
You
going
have to
to
stipulate that.
let Shannon go first.
Okay.
So-
I won't talk as long, so Will can talk longer on this segment. Okay. I ultimately, and this has been a journey. So as I've been speaking about various issues, mostly what I speak about is intersectionality between gender and race, and certainly class, because class is always code words for. And as I speak to that, and what I hope to speak to are people that don't believe it. It's always nice to be in a warm room, but we have to take our fight out to the rooms that are cold and the tables that are small. The fight really is about making a bigger table. And in making a bigger table, we have to, for those of us who are in agreement, understand it is our job too to make the table bigger for discourse. And for those that disagree, we cannot use those same tactics. It is imperative that we make our table bigger. But one of the things that I have learned recently, and I have said it, I am not in charge, and nor may I ever see, really, the manifestations of how we've leaned in, what our action ultimately impacts or creates. I don't need to be validated by seeing an iterative action. I don't need to be validated by changing someone's mind. I know what's true. It is my job to speak it. It is my job to speak it in a way that inspires and I hope creates for those who don't believe it. I hope creates questioning and thought. But I am also clear that this message isn't for everyone, and nor am I tied to it. I'm not tied to having to change people's minds. I'm not tied to it. I am tied to only to speak it. And then it becomes others' jobs, maybe who are tied to it, to help do that. But for me, it's the public discourse.
Thank you. Thank you for admonishing us to walk towards the light. Will, what is your perspective on that question? How do you operate as a public?
Well, yeah, well, I am a storyteller. You know, my format is writing journalism or writing books. And so if I can tell stories that haven't been told, that might open up minds, or that might tell a fuller picture of this nation's history, then that's all to the good. In 2008, I was on the Obama campaign, and his plane had flown into Raleigh, North Carolina, and there was a big rally for him. Hillary Clinton was still in the race. And after the rally, it ended late at night, like midnight. I walked outside of this hall where he had been speaking, and there were three young ladies, and they were sitting on a bench, and they were crying. And I told them that I was a journalist from the Washington Post traveling with the campaign, and I asked them if there was anything wrong or if there was anything that I could do that moment. And one of them said, we've been kicked out of our homes. Our fathers, all three of our fathers kicked us out of our homes because we support that African-American candidate in that hall on stage. And the three young ladies were white. And that was powerful that you had these three white students who stood up to their fathers. Because they, in essence, were really practicing what Dr. King wants us all to practice: judge a person not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And that night in my hotel room down there in North Carolina, I said to myself, Obama's going to win. He's going to win. And I raced back to my newsroom and I told my editor, I said, this cat's going to win. This senator out of Illinois is going into the White House. And my editor looked at me and he said, Will, you're tired. You're just exhausted. you've been on the road for weeks, and yes, he's very talented, but this nation is not ready. And I said, oh, I saw some things out on the road. He's going to win. And then I told my editor, I said, because he's going to win, I want to find an African-American who worked in the White House before the 1964 Civil Rights Bill was passed, because I want to tell the story of this looming victory in this Black man or Black woman who worked in the White House. Anyway, I tracked down this butler whose story had never been told, and he worked for 8 presidents. And so I go to the house, there's no memorabilia in his living room, his dining room. I think they showed me he worked 34 years in the White House. But after this 4-hour chat, his wife told him that he told me now, and she would take me down the basement. So he walked through the kitchen, and his basement door was locked. And he unlocked it with his key, and he said, hold on to my arm, because the switch is in the middle of the room. And so we walked very slowly down the steps. It's dark, we get to the middle of the room, he flicks on the light. And I look around his basement, and it's like being dropped into a beautiful room at the Smithsonian Museum. There were pictures of him with President Kennedy, with President Johnson, with President Ford, with President Carter. There were framed letters from all of the first ladies. There was pictures of him and Frank Sinatra, him and Sammy Davis Jr., him and Muhammad Ali, all the people who had visited the White House. There were gifts to him from all over the world. And I went wall to wall and saw all these gifts. This was a Black man who was telling the story of America from his job at the White House, and nobody had ever bothered to tell the story. And I walked over to him and I said, do you mean to tell me that nobody has ever told your story with all this, all these world travels, and, you know, the fact that you never missed a day of work in 4 years at the White House? And he looked at me and he said, you think I'm worthy, you will be the first. And I walked away from it because my eyes were well up with tears. The fact that this Black man did not know if his story, if his narrative was worthy or not, it literally broke my heart. And so in my position as a writer, as an artist, is what I try to do is tell those stories that haven't been told. And his was a story that hadn't been told. Of course, it got made into a movie. The movie played in 75 foreign countries.
Will,
And so
excuse me,
it's important.
we're having,
Yeah.
well, we're having a little bit of difficulty hearing you. I'm wondering if you might stop your video, if that might help our feed a little bit.
Okay. I don't know. Is that better?
It seems like the sound might be better. Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. So anyway, you know, I finished that story and it came out, and I example of the type of stories that I like to tell. And I tell all kinds of stories. I mean, stories in Asia and France, Germany, books about going down the Mississippi River, but these stories that haven't been told really mean a lot to me.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very clear that you are a very compelling storyteller. I have many more questions for both of you, but there are 20 minutes separating you all, the guest here from lunch. And so I'd like to yield the floor to your questions. So if you have questions, if you might come up to the mic.
Thank you all very much, Will and Shannon in particular, Clint, for moderating. I was wondering if we could focus, get a little bit closer to the ground. And I think about, the elections in Cleveland recently, the progressive mayor and an ordinance around police accountability or alternate response. They have a new diversion center over there too. There's fights going on in a lot of Ohio cities around police and jailing in Toledo, Columbus, Hamilton County, Montgomery County, our police. I know you're very involved in. And I wonder if, your observations of these various battles, struggles, not to be too overplayed, what does that say about sort of the direction that Ohio is going in some of these places? They're very contested, and a lot of these measures and efforts are quite progressive when it comes to law enforcement and incarceration.
Thank you.
I'll talk a little bit about what's going on the ground in Dayton, and there's so many. So let me just say, I was listening to, I believe you asked about voting rights, and we hadn't heard that in the last session. And I was just thinking to myself, my goodness, we have so many things that we can talk about that it almost does not give enough room for everything. But one of the things that we're very much involved with, or I'm very much involved with, is police engagement and community engagement. And a lot of the peers that I spend a lot of time with are also engaged with that. We have, through the mayor's response, 5 task force that were implemented, and it was supposed to be implemented for 6-7 months. Ours went longer and is still going, so way past a year. We did it 100% during COVID. COVID did not stop us. But it was, we've learned a couple of things. We had over 160 recommendations to change the way that the police move and center, not only within community, but all the way down from citizens appeal to use of force, to various ways of evaluation and assessment. We even, for one of the recommendations, leaned into how do we train differently? How do we train our cadets differently for those new police that are coming on the force? And I will tell you that there is, although wanting, a lot of resistance. And so we do live within this space that there is truly just super uber progressive energy that gets continuously abutted up against what we term, and we've even heard it earlier, traditional conservative or right wing. I'm going to tell you, I don't know if it's just that. I think part of the things and why you're seeing these bursts of energy and then this push, which always seems like it's 2 standard deviations worse than what we just gained, is I do believe that we have, even within our own progressive selves, a body of what we believe is white goodness. And if we don't hold ourselves accountable to you being able to also keep measure and stock and accountability and responsibility within our leftness, our left wingness, our liberalism, our progressivism, if white folks, you're not keeping the other good white folks leaned into what needs to be done. What it looks like, and I believe that it is a misnomer, that only the right is doing that. That's not true. I've sat at enough tables to know, even in this community, that those who feel like they're doing good will say nothing. They will keep silent, which is in itself a weapon. It is in itself. And so if we continue to act as if it is this, the monster that is loud and vociferous, and it is not the quiet, but the good-hearted, but says nothing, never lifts a fist, never lifts a voice, never lifts a question, never sits at a table to say, why are we doing this? Yet you are at all those tables. It is used and utilized against us as well. And I do believe that that is some of the reasons why you have this very segregated city of Dayton that has the highest or one of the top 5 eviction rates in our state of Ohio. Cleveland also, Columbus is also. That we have infant mortality that is high, that Dayton is second or third with infant mortality and including maternal death. Black women are dying in 2021 just to give birth. Don't be fooled that if we think that all these food deserts, book deserts, eviction rates, infant mortality rates, which are high, this high levels of segregation, high levels of class, high level of disenfranchisement, destabilization of the West Side. If we don't know what the West Side is, let me just tell you, it's like all communities within the state of Ohio that has a concentration of Black folk in poverty, that it becomes destabilized with disenfranchisement. If we believe that what is not going on right here and how it is connected to the state and the federal, and then we're talking about owning more of women's bodies, that class of women in those communities will not be hurt while we sit in silence and call ourselves good-hearted, Christian folk, there's a problem. So yes, we have 160 recommendations. We are just not clear how many of those will go through because we still continue to have people in leadership that literally move through fragility and breakdown if we talk about being racist. We have some that are in the room that are good meaning that can't say the words. And in fact, some of us who know that we just say diversity because, we're scared to say being racist because there'll be a breakdown. So I would say that part of the reason why we can't move forward with many things that we see that are loud and clear right here in Dayton, and I would tell you anywhere in Ohio, which is also reflective anywhere in the country, is because we have good people who believe they're good, who say nothing. And none of these measures will move forward if we are not all together on this.
Will, do you have thoughts to add?
Yeah, I've seen nations fall. I've seen nations crumble before my own eyes, and I've covered war zones. And we saw what happened in this country last January in the insurrection. So I do think that there are too many people in this country unwilling to stand up for democracy. We are losing those people because and let me just come right out and say it, the crackpot, crazy, rabid right wing and Fox News are playing a significant part in tearing apart this country. The insurrection happened for a reason. It happened because there was a gap there. And look, it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said, this country will be destroyed from within before it is destroyed from without. So, we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in this country, like Nelson Mandela started in South Africa when he came out of prison. He saved that country because he was willing to lay it all on the line. We need to talk about what has happened in the past in South Africa, and we need to talk about that in this country. We need to stop banning books. That's what people are doing in Texas and Florida and some other states. They're starting to ban books. This is the route to ruination. It is. And you can't sugarcoat it because of what happened on January 6th. And we really have to be careful who we put in the office. We had a man in office 4 years who tried to tear the Constitution apart. And those are facts. Those are facts. End of my comment.
Well, I think they're going to allow me one more question. And I think that you've led me right to the doorstep of it because we talked early on about this potential part of the theme. for this conference, right? You talked about methods for making change. But there's a parallel question that I want to shift us to, that you've already actually led us towards. And I'd like to shift the focus because I think that you're talking in some ways about the dynamic of who's imperiled being changed. When we start to talk about truth and reconciliation or transformation, when we start to talk about turning a light onto the grievances that are impacting people's access to basic human rights. So Audre Lorde said that Black and third world people are expected to educate white people as to our humanity. Women are expected to educate men. Lesbians and gay men are expected to educate the heterosexual world. The oppressors maintain their position and evade their responsibility for their actions. There is a constant drain of energy, which might be better used in redefining ourselves and devising realistic scenarios for altering the present and constructing the future. More simply stated, and I've heard it here many, many, many times, just within the past couple of days, do we expend all of our energy educating folks who may or may not want to hear it? And what does that mean in terms of building a future? I want to ask you what you think about the importance of accountability as a focus of human rights struggle. Because there are many good reasons for it, and yet there are those who say that's not where we should be putting our focus. Particularly, what do you think about importance of accountability as a focus of human rights struggle around policing, but certainly not only policing? Is it important to your work? And I'm going to start with Shannon, who looks ready to speak.
I think I talk about accountability every day. I wonder if what we would look like if we really did hold systems accountable to making a difference. Interestingly enough, we had just recently a mayor runoff. And believe it or not, and I bet you that I won't see stunned faces, one of the options was someone who took part of January 6th. Can you believe it? And in fact, we can. And so that's the gap. That we, again, are so quick to believe that someone else put this man in presidency, that someone else is doing this, that someone else is dismantling. It is not a shock anymore for those of us good people. And so I say yes, that how can we have human rights and how can we center human dignity and not be accountable for all of it? I would love to see in this city that has 0 Fortune 500 companies. And for those that don't know what that means there's no unrestricted dollars falling into the community. That's a big deal. That means that the dollars that are made in this community, and we can look around at those that are making money, they're all nonprofit and they give off a little bit of that money, but not much. And so we're in a city that has big, big issues, that takes big, big money, and we don't have any Fortune 500 companies. And then those that do well move outside of this city. Those that do well don't even live here. We have people running things in this community that are making money and don't live here. So we don't even get to feel the fruits of their labor, of our money that is expended in this community to pay that, and they live everywhere else, Columbus, Cincinnati. And then we wonder about accountability. Yes, we should hold an account for our city officials. Let me tell you, politics is local. If you haven't heard that before, I know you have, but that's serious. Business is local. If you haven't questioned, and I know I'm on you all stage, what UD is doing in this fight, do it. It makes us better, the questioning, the accountability. Show me the proof. It makes us better. We cannot do this thing if we're not holding each other. The hospitals, the government, education, that's all we got in Dayton. Accountable. It is integral. It is obligatory in a community that is in a lack. And we are in that, Dayton. We're in that.
So Will, Shannon has talked to us a little bit about accountability within the context of a very hyper like local context. You started this part of the conversation by talking about the TRC in South Africa. So I'm wondering if you have more to say, please, about accountability and what that might look like and why it's so important.
Well, look, we just had a horrific shooting in Michigan from a 15-year-old with a gun. So, and now the DA up there is talking about holding his parents accountable for letting him have that gun. So I think some of it is just simple common sense. This is a gun crazy nation. We're a nation now that in certain legislatures that they're trying to stop people from having access to the ballot box. And so, look, this country is going to make up its mind sooner rather than later if we want to continue as an open government, as a government for the people and by the people. This nation really, to me, is on the edge. And it has to get its act together. It's a road that can be navigated, but only if people, start doing the right thing. I don't know if they will. I don't know if we will keep in electing crazy people and sending them to Washington. Senators and House members. I mean, some of these people are just wackos and they get airspace on TV every night on these news shows. And we have people listening to them, people not wanting to wear masks, people not wanting to take the vaccines, people arguing against science. And so these are facts that everybody in this country, all 300 million plus people in this country, has to look inside themselves, has to look in the mirror, and has to say, it's time to start doing the right thing. You can't legislate that. You can't legislate common sense, unfortunately, but there are going to be consequences if we continue down this road. End of my comment.
Thank you for that comment. I think that that's a wonderful comment for us to end on. As I thank our speakers for what they brought to us this afternoon, I'm reminded last night, my Uber driver, my clearly underemployed Uber driver said to me, I quoted him, I wrote it down. People spend too much time arguing to change people's minds about human rights concerns. They need to just get in there and start applying solutions. History shows us that people's thinking shifts after the change is made. Thank you both for getting in there and applying solutions. And thank you for joining us for this plenary.